Pa. I'm good. How about you? You're fine. You always say you're fine no matter what. Hi, Tinker. Hi, sweetie.
So what you been up to?
The usual.
The usual?
The usual. Too much
Yeah,
work.
you are. You're up to the usual.
I am up to the usual.
Oh, thank you very
Lucky us.
much.
Lucky us. You're welcome very
Much appreciated. This takes care of my nausea, happiness, and my toleration. I'm not a bit ashamed of it. I've had one lung removed. The last time I was in, they found a degenerated disc from cancer. They put me terminal. My grandson or my daughter, one or the other, mentioned marijuana to me one day. And I said, hey, I'll try anything. That's whenever I was 109 pounds. I smoked a couple of marijuanas and ate a half a chocolate cake that night. My appetite started coming back. I had what they call the munchies. They haven't ceased.
They haven't.
I'm up to 143 pounds.
Cannabis, marijuana, pot, hashish. It goes by many names, but whatever it's called, it's often the center of controversy. To many people, the drug that comes from this plant is a dangerous narcotic, a gateway to hard drugs and a life of addiction, so its use must be suppressed under the full weight of the law. On the other hand, a growing number regards it as a benign medicine that provides effective relief from the pain of arthritis, seizures of epilepsy, and many other ills. In North America, these two opposing views have created a highly charged emotional conflict. In this atmosphere, it's difficult to weigh the merits of different points of view. So, is cannabis really a dangerous drug? How effective is it as a medicine?
My son, who in 1967 was diagnosed as having acute lymphatic leukemia, he was 10 years old then. By the time he reached the age of 13, was beginning to get some of the cancer chemotherapeutic substances which cause severe nausea and vomiting. He would vomit for about 8 hours. I'll have to dry heaves for 8 hours. He would vomit in the car on the way home from the hospital, and then just lie in his room with his head over a bucket on the floor.
At a dinner party, a colleague told how marijuana had dramatically reduced nausea in a similar case.
On the way home from that dinner party, my wife Betsy said, well, maybe we should get some marijuana for Danny. And I'm ashamed to say, I said, no, we can't do that. It's against the law, and we don't want to embarrass the people at the children's hospital who are taking such great care of Danny. His next chemotherapy was due a couple of weeks later, and Betsy and Danny smoked in the parking lot outside of the children's hospital. I couldn't believe what happened, because not only did he not have any nausea, but he even asked his mother to could we get a submarine sandwich on the way home. And I then called Dr. Jaffe, who was the doctor who was directly involved in Danny's care, and said to him, look, I told him the story, and I said, I'm not going to stand in the way of his using marijuana this time. And Dr. Jaffe said, no, don't have him do it in the parking lot. Have him do it in the treatment room. I want to see this for myself. And they did smoke in the treatment room. And same thing, no problem, submarine sandwich on the way home. Instead of going to bed, he would go back to school. And during, to make a long story short, during the last year of his life, it made such a difference, not just to Danny, but to the whole family. And I began to wonder, is there something to this forgotten medicine?
Lester Grinspoon, as a father, mourned the death of his son. As a professor at Harvard Medical School, he began to look into the history of cannabis as medicine.
An Englishman by the name of W.B. O'Shaughnessy, who was working in Calcutta, used it and treated some patients following what the indigenous use was, and published a paper which created quite a stir in 1842 in Western medicine.
In the ancient civilizations of the East, cannabis had been known for thousands of years. In India, it's a familiar harvest. Its use in medicine also has a long history. Manuscripts, centuries old, contain the secrets of Ayurvedic healing. In this clinic, prescriptions containing cannabis are prepared on the premises. In the 1840s, a British commission sent to investigate cannabis noted that it was an important part of Indian culture, and to restrict it would cause hardship. In their report, they called it the poor man's heaven, an affordable relief in hard times. In any city today in India, cannabis drinks and milkshakes are available in the marketplace. This group of friends is getting in the mood for an important occasion. Today is the Festival of Colors. It's the time of year to give thanks for the crops that have been gathered in. In the temple, the priests act on behalf of the deity. The range and brilliance of the colors they shower on the participants represent the variety and richness of the harvest. Included in this bounty, cannabis is simply a gift from the gods. Whether of divine origin or not, cannabis became of practical interest to the British Raj in the 1840s. Details of its use as medicine were conveyed to the medical profession in England, where it was widely used. In London, the young Queen Victoria, who suffered from muscle cramps, found cannabis brought soothing relief. Across the Atlantic, it became a folk medicine, easing the hardships of pioneer life. But early in this century, everything changed. Emily Murphy in Edmonton wrote The Black Candle. Its theme, marijuana today, tomorrow the opium den.
Suddenly we find in Hansard, it's prohibited. And the debate on why marijuana suddenly became illegal is about a line long. One minister stands up and simply says, we have a new drug on the prohibited drug schedule, marijuana. That's the extent of the debate.
In the USA, Harry Anslinger, head of the Narcotics Bureau, produced Reefer Madness. Marijuana was identified with the jazz culture and its corrupting influences. Taking these grotesque scenes at face value, Congress rushed marijuana onto the list of dangerous drugs. With added manpower and money, the Bureau was now able to protect America's youth.
The next tragedy may be that of your daughter, or your son, or yours, or yours, or yours.
2 generations later, Valerie Corral runs the Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana, or WAM, to supply medicine to the sick. She wanted others to benefit as she had done.
Do we have bigger weights now?
Well, there's on Kathy and Suzanne.
On the coast of California, she lives in Santa Cruz. Hillary Black, who runs the Compassionate Club in Vancouver, has come south to hear her story.
As we were driving back after a long afternoon in the hot springs, a plane began to fly toward us. We thought we might need to make an emergency landing. We pulled off the side of the road, but he simply made a quick turn around the lake and came back following us.
Almost like the plane was harassing you.
Yeah, yes, it was. And it turned out that he was. He was being playful, is what he said. And so my girlfriend saw him in the rearview mirror, and even though it's a plane, you can't hear it until it's really overhead or beyond you. And by the time I heard her scream or gasp and looked up, the belly of the plane was here, and our car lifted off the ground. What? And it rolled 365 feet, and we were both thrown from the car.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and it left me with a brain trauma and grand mal epilepsy, sometimes as many as 5 seizures a day. I went through a long regime of many different drugs, and I was unable to find a medication that would control the seizures, and I lived in this vacuum of a drug stupor. I really felt like I lived underwater. What ensued was a deliberate effort to try to find an alternative. Of course, we didn't know of any, but I had still been receiving at that time medical journals and periodicals, and Mike was reading through one and read that laboratory-induced seizures in rats had been controlled with marijuana. And we looked at each other and we thought, can this be? I mean, this would be too simple. When we were first arrested here, we were growing 5 plants. And truthfully, I was stunned. And I was the first person in the state of California to challenge the law on medical necessity. Knowing what I knew, I wasn't very well going to say I'm guilty of a crime. Shortly after our arrest, there was a signature gathering to put a medical marijuana initiative just to get the pulse of Santa Cruz County, how people felt about it. And it won with 77.1%. So I thought that meant a public national statement. Hooray, I'm the first person in the United States that can legally grow marijuana. A year and 1 month later, they showed up, and they came again, and they took our plants, and we were livid. And we decided that at that time we would file a suit against them and go completely public and make the statement that we were going to start not only growing it again, but an organization to give it away to teach people who are seriously ill with glaucoma, with epilepsy, with multiple sclerosis, for whom it works. And so we're getting together. We're going to get together, and we're going to continue to use it.
Oh, God,
We're all sick of this weather.
Yeah.
Leslie is Nathan's mother.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes. How are things going?
One of the many people Valerie supplies.
Still not finished. I mean, it's just so much.
Nathan's 17 now, and he had a couple of seizures when he was young, about 6 years old, and went on medication for 2 years and didn't have any more seizures. And then on his 13th birthday, he had another seizure. And then the nightmare began, and the seizures came more and more in frequency, and we would try one medication and it wouldn't have any effect on him, and we'd try another medication and there was no stopping the seizures. They were increasing and increasing. When things would get really bad, he would have a grand mal, he'd be up for an hour, and then he'd fall down again and have another grand mal. He would maybe bite his lip, maybe bite his tongue, maybe smash his head on the way down, and maybe be eating and choke on his food.
Because you couldn't swim before.
We wound up going to UCSF Epilepsy Center when our local doctors or the neurologists in the area felt like there was nothing else that they could do for him. So they basically said the only thing we can think of doing to help him at this point is to actually separate the right-hand side of his brain from the left-hand side, which is a rather large surgery, and we'll get back to you on that. And they turned around to walk out of the room, and I said, no way, you're not walking out of the room. He can't have a life like this anymore. He spoke about killing himself. And to hear your child say that he doesn't want to live anymore, I can't tell you what that feels like. I used to visualize us all getting into a car and just driving off a cliff together, because I couldn't figure out any other way to make the whole nightmare stop. Just prior to that, I had heard about Val and medical marijuana. So we had just started cooking up in soy milk with it and giving Nathan a little bit. And what we were finding right away was that he was sleeping and his appetite was starting to return, because some of the side effects of the seizure medication are just outrageous. He wasn't eating, he wasn't sleeping, and if you don't sleep and you don't eat, you have more seizures. So it was like this vicious cycle that we couldn't get off of with him. So when they said increase the medication, I said thank you very much and hung up the phone, and I increased the milk. They called back again in 2 weeks and said, how's he doing? I said, he's not having any seizures. They said, oh, good. That last increase in the medication must have worked. I said, I never did it. I never did the last medication increase. I increased his milk. So they giggled. They thought that was very interesting, and they wound up calling it mother's milk. We have kept him on this milk now. It's been almost 2 years that he has not had any seizures. We feel strong enough to try and start getting him off of some of the other medications, and that's what we're trying to do.
The meeting of WHAM members is an occasion to establish community.
Yeah, well, I know it made you stay out there.
Welcome aboard.
Now, with Proposition 215, Valerie Corral has the support of the state of California.
Super.
Californians who needed marijuana for medical purposes had the right to use it and to obtain it, and that if it was recommended by a physician and determined that someone's health required the use of marijuana for alleviation of pain and suffering, that that was a legal and permitted use of marijuana.
I was wondering how the muffins are doing. I was thinking about typing up a little, survey, seeing how they're doing and everything. I was wondering if you guys were all willing to fill that out for me, so I can figure out what I'm doing.
They're wonderful, honey, and they're wonderful.
Yeah, it's great on my stomach.
Show that smile, Tony. Turn around there.
That's a happy muffin smile.
He's a muffin man.
Yeah, for every week. Yeah,
But under federal law, the growing and distribution of marijuana still brings with it the risk of arrest and imprisonment. Local support is no guarantee.
The City Council in Santa Cruz did pass a resolution in support of the activities of WHAM, and the reason we did so is because the people of our community support this.
Within the next few weeks, if we can get past the storm.
You can grow enough in here to last all of the people that you take care of for the whole year.
That's how we do it.
Yes.
We're guaranteed for a year.
Wow, that's wonderful.
As much as one can guarantee.
And it's all outdoor, which is
Right.
far superior.
Right.
That's
Right.
great.
Yeah, it's totally organic. Pretty much marijuana grown outdoors is pest-free, so we don't need to use pesticides or anything like that.
One of the things that we do in our organization is we're very stringent about our membership.
If we don't maintain our squeaky clean image, it can discredit the whole movement in a way. So every organization that's in the state now has to have certain standards that they have to live up to.
Mm-hmm.
This is what she did.
Susie has an advanced and painful cancer.
I am an incorporating member of WHAM as an organization. Signing the papers for incorporation and seeing them come back accepted was, for someone who has a fatal disease, this was it. This was medical marijuana. I was the first My thumbprint is on the history of the state of California, the history of the United States.
It's astounding. It sometimes surprises me. I can drive a car, and I can run an organization, and bring a whole bunch of people and friends of like-mindedness and spirit together, and I can do it because I use marijuana. It's remarkable. I couldn't believe it either. I really couldn't. When I first realized that it would control my seizures, I didn't believe it. Not fully. I wanted to, but I really couldn't fully believe it, and I can do it myself.
This is the first organization to ever do this. And we come from such a really compassionate place.
It's incredibly inspiring for me. You guys make my dream closer. You know, I can see it alive in material.
So lots of like soap opera spoons.
With fresh inspiration from Santa Cruz, Hillary is back in Vancouver.
All right. Have you ever tried this strain before? The grape. I'm a organizer of the Compassion Club as well as a member of it. The club consists of people from all parts of society, all financial brackets. We have about 400 members now, and building. You know, we're registering people every day. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good. I'm good. I'm just curious, though. You know, I have actually osteoarthritis, as you can see.
Yeah.
If I came in and asked you for some, would you prescribe it?
What we require is a document of diagnosis, which is just something from a doctor that states what your medical condition is.
But if he were to simply sign a form saying, yes, David has osteoarthritis, with nothing about what he recommends, would that be sufficient
That
for
would
you?
be sufficient. There are a lot of doctors that are very fearful, so we have had to just accept documents of diagnosis for conditions that we know absolutely cannabis does help with.
Greg has the muscle spasms of multiple sclerosis.
I want to see what happens when he smokes.
It helps. It helps.
I remember the first time that you came into the club, the thing that made you stop shaking the most was just when Star just put her hands on your shoulders.
If I have a beautiful woman massaging me.
It's incredible that affectionate touch can have that effect.
Yeah. This way you don't shake as much, Greg. Got it, baby?
Greg.
Friend, you got good luck.
What a long drag that is.
He's a good one. Are you happy?
It's actually hard to find pot that's good enough to really help him. We rolled a joint for him once that I think had 3 kinds of really good pot, 2 kinds of hash, and a whole bunch of oil on it, and that actually completely stopped it all.
It's very dramatic, the effect already.
Yeah, it's just unreal.
Marijuana is versatile. It calms severe muscle spasms, and in glaucoma, it delays the onset of blindness.
I lost sight of this eye, and then this one's down to 5 or 10%. But I'm lucky. My doctor said I'm lucky. I still have vision, right? So I don't know if it's marijuana or not, but it's working. So I don't want to. I just do not say, okay, I quit, right? I find it good for arthritis also, and for sleeping, and for many things.
We have a lot of research that we want to do, but it all depends on having a consistent supply, which at this point we don't, because we're not growing for ourselves.
So where do you get it?
There is about 10 people that
You have
I've narrowed it down
suppliers?
to that I deal with, and they are excellent growers. It all works on a front basis, so that they bring me the pot and I distribute it and then I pay for it.
This is all for the Compassion Club. Police in Vancouver have said they're not going to bust them, so if they're going to leave them alone, they need a supply from somewhere. And I just don't think they should have to pay $3,200 a pound for something that you can grow. I mean, hydroponic marijuana, if grown on a big scale, you can grow it for the same amount as hydroponic tomatoes, and they retail for $3 a pound.
Jim Wakeford is suing the federal government. He needs a legal supply of an essential medicine.
The fact is, it's been helpful in dealing with the side effects from the AIDS drugs I was on. My drug regimen was so strict. I had to be up at 8 every morning. I couldn't go to bed before midnight because I had to dose at each time, which meant I could never sleep in or ever go to bed early. And that went on for 2 years. You'll be pleasantly surprised.
John Goodhue is Jim's doctor.
I'm going to show you for an example what one of my patients who does use marijuana and who basically has had a tremendous improvement in his immune functioning since starting this treatment, but could absolutely not tolerate the side effects without marijuana. Now he takes, this one is called Crixivan or Indinavir, and it has to be taken every 8 hours. Some people go, oh, 3 times a day. No, every 8 hours, and on an empty stomach. He then has to take 2 of these, which are called Zerit or D4T, and they have to be taken close to every 12 hours. And taken with this other drug, which is called 3TC, which is also taken twice a day, and usually with food to prevent nausea, okay? So we've now got 3 doses without food, 2 doses with food, and he also takes this drug, which is a particularly nasty drug in terms of side effects. This one is called Videx or DDI. The problem is, each and every one of these drugs has side effects. This one, 3TC, not bad. D14, not bad. Crixivan, DDI, tremendous nausea, and in many people, total loss of appetite, especially with this.
I'm a little unsteady still.
Smokable marijuana is so unique in that it is so easy for the patient to control the administration of their own dose. You have 2 puffs of a joint. If it's controlled your nausea or if it stimulates your appetite, great, go ahead. If not, have another 2 puffs. So within minutes, you can have given yourself the appropriate dose of medication. And in that aspect, it's far superior to anything else that I would have to offer them.
And I have a joint before lunch, and I have a joint before dinner. And if I'm having a beautiful night, I'll have a 3rd joint between dinner and dessert. Because I got to put 20 more pounds on this scrawny little body.
The mystery of marijuana lies in its complexity. The synthesis of one component, THC, forms the drug marinol.
Nobody knows why marijuana works so well as an anti-nausea agent and as an appetite stimulant. And this is evident when you look at the clinical outcome when you try to use Navalon or Marinol. The effects are prolonged, 12, 15, 18, 24 hours. People will remain completely intoxicated. Most people find it extremely unpleasant, the anxiety and the paranoia that goes along with it.
All I remember is one experience on Marinol that went on for 7 hours of nausea, waves and waves of nausea and puking. And of course, I've never put Marinol in my body again, nor will I ever.
Donald Abrams surprised the establishment by proposing a study of the whole plant.
We've been trying since 1993 to conduct a study or design a study to investigate whether smoking marijuana is useful in patients with HIV infection and at the same time whether it's safe. It's been difficult, certainly, to obtain a legal source of marijuana and to get funding to conduct the study.
Could this illegal drug be beneficial?
The comments that we ultimately got were comments that were concerned about why we would even consider studying such a toxic substance. So there was also one reviewer, and these were going to be patients with AIDS wasting, who was concerned that if we stimulated appetite and patients started to eat too much, they might develop high blood fats and hardening of the arteries. Now, this is not something that patients with AIDS really have the luxury of worrying about. So I was concerned about whether my peers that were reviewing this were really peers. For some reason, this emotional political charge is very present and makes it very difficult for science to go on in the midst of all that politics.
Kent Berridge and Terry Robinson are studying addiction. focusing on a chemical called dopamine. Its release in the brain measures the importance of every pleasant stimulus. It could be food, or sex, or drugs. Rats have the same dopamine system. Self-administered hard drugs release dopamine, but they also change the brain. Cells in the dopamine system normally look like this. But hard drugs cause them to grow, become sensitized, and send an exaggerated message.
As far as we know, drugs like marijuana don't produce this neural sensitization, which may account for why animals won't readily self-administer THC. It might account for why people who use marijuana really aren't characterized as compulsive drug takers or drug seekers.
Most sophisticated drug researchers now believe that cannabis's place as a drug of addiction is down at the bottom of the list with coffee. Cannabis is a truly remarkably non-toxic drug.
And marijuana will take the place of a lot of prescription drugs. It'll take the place of Valium. It'll take the place of Xanax. It will take the place of Tylenol, aspirin, relieve migraines. It's just a world of good. Like if I fail to not want dinner some night, tired, or don't feel like really a dinner, my wife turns around and looks at me, honey, maybe you better have a cigarette, marijuana. Maybe you better have a marijuana.
Pusher.
It's been terrific.
To possess and grow marijuana is illegal, as Terry Parker found out.
The charge against me is with cultivation and possession for the purpose of trafficking. I developed epilepsy at 4 years of age. I was growing it because I simply, with my budget, cannot afford the price of marijuana industry as it is today. And I think much more convenient for myself to grow my own medicine.
At his trial, Terry was represented by Aaron Harnett.
We structured the case, both the Crown Attorney and I, in such a way that we agreed with the obvious and spent our time in a quasi-scientific inquiry, putting some of the best minds in the area up on the stand, and we were educating ourselves as well as the judge as the trial went on. Valerie was a tremendous witness.
It was my good fortune to be able to travel to Toronto and to testify in this most incredible case, and really has...
Really a landmark case.
Yes, truly. Because of its bearing on constitutionality, which is remarkable.
Well,
we wanted a remedy fashioned that would help a whole range of people who have a medical need for marijuana. And the judge agreed with us, and he actually declared that law invalid for all of Canadians, and tinkered with it a bit to allow Terry and people like Terry to be able to possess and grow marijuana for medical purposes.
Tonight, Terry Parker can smoke a joint legally.
An illegal drug makes legal history.
But the federal government has since appealed the verdict.
We've relegated to the courts the difficult policy decisions that Parliament seems unwilling to tackle. If they can blame the courts and say, well, it's those crazy judges who made it legal, not us, then that might get them off the hook. And so long as sick people are being stupidly prosecuted, then that is the court's role to step in and make sure it stops.
The unchanging official view of marijuana conveniently obscures more serious problems. RCMP Constable Gil Putter on Vancouver's east side.
Anybody who abuses any substance has got some serious underlying problems which should be dealt with by a medical practitioner, a counselor, an educator. But simply arresting, incarcerating, punishing somebody is counterproductive. It's only going to make the problem worse. Maybe that's wishful thinking.
It's hard to enforce an unreasonable law.
A lot of kids on the steps are smoking. Some of them might be smoking marijuana.
Still a place where they're picked up for that?
Certainly the officers that I work with are not particularly concerned about anybody in possession of a small amount of marijuana or consuming it for their own purposes. I think where the concern is trafficking to young people and possession in the schools, that type of thing. People that I encounter who've used cannabis, whether a small or large amount, are generally quite passive, easy to deal with, and I really can't remember ever having a problem with anybody. Marijuana is not nearly as harmful as alcohol, tobacco, or any of the opiates. Marijuana is, particularly for recreational and medical uses, relatively harmless.
In Santa Cruz, there's the same divide between federal and local attitudes.
The implementation of Proposition 215 is now challenged as being in violation of federal law, so we have something of a crisis here in California.
They basically threatened us with license revocation if in fact we recommended it. We went to court, and in fact the court agreed that we really had the freedom to at least recommend it, if not prescribe it.
We're going to do what we can to follow the law. At times it's difficult because it doesn't answer all the questions about who can provide marijuana, who can grow it, how much can they grow. There's many unanswered questions, but we will do our best to follow 215.
Oh, pretty good.
Kathy got caught up in these unanswered questions. Marijuana relieves her arthritis.
The cops wind up coming to my house, and I had one little marijuana plant growing, and they busted me in my own home. They took everything. They took my plant, they took my tray, they took my marijuana, everything. And, you know, then I had to go to court, and this was before I was involved in WHAM, and they fined me. They were going to send me to diversion, which is a drug school where they tell you how bad you are, and they show you films about drug use and all that kind of stuff. And when I went to the hearing, the judge looked at me, and he could see obvious deformity, and he looked at the DA and said, well, maybe she doesn't want diversion. You know, he said, nothing.
In Santa Cruz, it's nothing. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's 92 years in jail. In Oklahoma City, people are gathering for a rally to protest Will Foster's sentence. Like Kathy, he was using marijuana to ease the pains of arthritis. The police raided his house looking for amphetamines on a tip from a confidential informer.
I mean, he's a medical marijuana user. He's not one of those people who's just partying around. And they didn't even find any methamphetamine.
It's a day Meg Foster will never forget.
So as I put my hand on the doorknob to disengage it, the door just exploded inward. I fell backwards onto my 5-year-old daughter and knocked her onto the floor. And there was this very large man with no badge, dressed in what I think of as biker attire. Harley Davidson t-shirts, the high metal boots, with a very large gun in my face and at my head. And I'm sorry. It frightened me badly. Very badly. I don't think I've ever been that scared. I had no idea who these people were. And my daughter is screaming, leave my mommy alone. And I think that was the hardest part. They searched everything. There were 60 plants in the basement, and approximately half a dozen of them were about a foot tall, had really just started to bud. And the rest of them were saplings, 2-3 inches at the most. They wanted a plea bargain of 12 years in. And if Will gets 12 years in, then I get 5 years in. or I can take their deal and testify for the state against him. It seemed so unconscionable for me to do that. I felt like I would be betraying. But somebody had to be here to raise these children. So I took their deal.
Meg and Will agonized over their decision. But the only way for Meg to remain free, to care for the children, was to testify against her husband. So Will refused the plea bargain and opted for trial by jury. By an arbitrary decision of the court, the evidence of medical necessity was disallowed. He was given a mandatory 92 years.
They took him in, and that's the last time I was with him, when he wasn't behind a bar or behind a fence or whatever. In less than 30 seconds, my entire life was ripped apart.
It's a long 5-hour drive to see him.
I got 70 years for cultivation. I got 20 years for having that marijuana in the presence of a child. I got 2 years for possession with intent. They put you in prison hoping that your family will forget about you. Your friends will forget about you. You don't get to see your kids grow up. It's kind of hard.
That's cool.
How's the kids?
They're okay.
They don't want people to have people that care on them on the outside.
Oh, but you had their signs with a few.
There's marijuana here. Actually, I have more access to drugs in here than I did on the outside.
It went well.
If you want the sign, go outside. They're not my rules. Apparently they are, man, because you're enforcing them. It's my job. I have a job.
Think of, on one side, all the DE agents, the district attorneys, the assistant district attorneys, the people who build jails, who guard prisoners. There's a lot of personnel and money involved in this now. The U.S. government has spent countless millions of dollars trying to establish the toxicity which would justify this prohibition, which has led to the arrest of 11 million, mostly young Americans.
I want them to just stop harassing and jailing and fining and brutalizing my sick brothers and sisters.
For us, there was no other choice. There just wasn't another choice.
A lot of the drugs that we're warring against have a significant advantage in decreasing suffering. And medical marijuana, which is very, very safe, is one of the principal herbs that I ought to be able to use in order to help my patients.
You take a crock pot, you mix up some green stuff with some white stuff, and you give it to him, and suddenly he's not having seizures, he's eating, he's laughing. Maybe a little bit too much at first, but he was laughing again.
All right. We're patients. We don't want to be criminals. We want a safe supply. It's natural. Just leave us alone and let us do it.
Allow it to be what it is. Yeah, and then when you're finally ingesting the medicine, you're also ingesting your own love for yourself in many ways.